Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar today by Reliance ACSN. My name is Tarquin Folliss. I'm the Vice Chairman of Reliance. And today we're going to talk about COVID-19's impact on work, what that means for cybersecurity, and in particular what that means for the legal sector and how it impacts. We've got a really good panel today. We have Lucy Pegler from Burges Salmon, and I will get our panel to introduce themselves in a minute. John Segger from Linklaters and Rob Vann from Reliance. And I'll ask Lucy if she could tell us a few things about herself first.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Tarquin. So I'm Lucy Pegler. I'm a director in Burges Salmon's Technology and Communications Group. I've been with Burges Salmon for just over 6 years, so I cover a broad range of areas, including data and cyber security. But very much here today to give my perspective as a lawyer who's in recent months transitioned to working from home full time, which is my new normal, and hopefully we'll have things to add in terms of my take of what Burges Salmon has been doing and more generally the legal sector.
John.
Hello there, my name's John Segger. I'm Head of Information Security at Linklaters. So I've been at Linklaters for 21 years this year, but I've had a number of different roles while I've been there. So I've got a technical background, and then more recently moved into running the information security team.
Thank you. Robin.
Hi folks, Rob Vann, Chief Solution Officer for Reliance. Been architecting and building cybersecurity solutions for nearly 30 years. So really here to do the technical and solution piece around how we support people and where it all fits together in this brave new world we all live in.
Thank you very much, Rob. So I'll just lay out the format and give you a bit of house rules. I will, as the chair of this panel, put a few questions, but obviously we'd be delighted to have questions from the audience as well. And if you look on your screen, you'll find a questions tab, which you can push down, and you can put or type your questions in, and we'll feed the questions in to the panel around about halfway mark on this webinar, which will run until 11 o'clock this morning. So, and if you have any other comments that you want to make, which aren't questions, just comments in general, there's a chat box as well, which you can add your comments, and we'll take note of those as well. And I'll be monitoring those throughout the webinar. So I guess the question here is, first of all, what is the new normal? We've been down in lockdown now for 3 months. Offices are shut, and the vast majority of people who have still got jobs are working from home. And that has had a dramatic impact upon the way we all work. So what does that mean in terms of security, in particular cyber security? And how is this new normal affecting us? I thought just before I ask the first questions to the panel, I'd give a bit of a background on some of the things that are happening. For example, cyber crime is on the increase and has increased significantly since this crisis took place and since we've been in lockdown. And a few of the statistics are quite staggering. A 25% increase in ransomware in the first quarter of this year. A 30% increase in business email compromise, which is where people scam businesses to extort money, in just the first fortnight of May. And currently we are experiencing, I think this is a fairly conservative figure, about 192,000 cyber attacks on businesses in the UK per week. So clearly the criminals have seen the advantages of working in this crisis and playing on us. The question is, how do we combat that? And I suppose the first question I'll put to the panel is, well, law firms have always been targets in the past, and I don't think that's changing, simply because of the confidential information that law firms hold. John, do you think COVID-19, the current crisis, has altered the threat? And if so, in what way?
Okay, I think actually the threat hasn't really changed. Excuse me. I think it remains the same. I think what's happened clearly is there's a new big story. There's a new lure that the attackers and the scammers can use to get their hooks into someone. And I think that's what's really changed. And so that really does put the emphasis on making our users aware of the threats and making people more alert, and just keep chipping away at that that awareness piece to keep people really skeptical of any sort of communication they're receiving, I think. But I think overall, I mean, the threat, I think, remains the same. Would be my view. I mean, there's maybe some new vectors that are appearing, but overall, I'd say the threat is the same.
Well, what's your view? You see it through a much wider optic.
So I think largely I agree with John, and it's very interesting that you know, the attack has been repurposed to focus on the current situation. I think the interesting thing for me is what has changed is both the attack surface and the people's inherent desire to respond. So obviously it's been a time of crisis and concern, and that makes people more likely to click on things because they're more worried, and they're already at a 7 out of 10 in terms of risk, so they click things they shouldn't perhaps. And of course the flip side to that is, you know, we've all had these really great cybersecurity defenders working on our behalf. They're now disconnected from their tooling, they're disconnected from their environments, and that can also create a challenge. So what I've seen is, absolutely agree with John, the threat remains very similar or the same, but sometimes the reactions and the attack surface have adapted, and that means a slightly different way of thinking, and I think people are rising to that challenge admirably from what I've seen. But it's a world where, you know, we've seen people deploy, you know, many hundreds or thousands of laptops over a very short space of time, and they're trying to ensure that those are used well, and, you know, people are working from their kitchens, from their bedrooms, from their home offices, and that's created a whole set of new challenges, which, you know, has been interesting, exciting, challenging, all of the above in my world.
And Richard, from your view, what do you think about how COVID-19 has affected the attack environment?
Yeah, I agree with the comments that John and Robin have made. I think from my perspective, the factors that have typically and historically made law firms a target in terms of the information that we hold, the funds that we process, and the role that we play in enabling business and commercial transactions, those haven't changed. But the way that we work has, and I think a big part of it is in terms of the responsibility that we as lawyers and you know, our business services now take for securing their home working environment. So kind of the model that we use has changed, and it's getting people kind of at that learning curve and a cultural shift into understanding that cybersecurity is not just the responsibility of our in-house IT team. We all have a part to play, and making sure that we're understanding what the new threats look like in this new working environment.
John, can I ask a question about working from home? Because of course, for most firms, the majority of people before the crisis were working in offices. How has this change of the vast majority of the workforce now working from home, how has that impacted on a company like Linklaters?
So for us, from a technical perspective, we've had to change very little. We were well set up for a long while for remote working. In fact, our laptop fleet, when they connect via our wireless network in the office, the mechanism we use to get that device connected to our network and secured, that's the same whether they're in the office or whether they're at home. So if someone takes that device home, technically there's no real difference there. So we were quite lucky in that respect. So we've not had to make many changes. We had to increase some licenses, some capacity on a remote access solution we have for those that don't have firm issued devices, a virtual desktop solution. But apart from that, we had to change nothing. And I think it's kind of dovetails a bit into the last question, because not everyone has been that lucky, and those that have had to make a lot of changes in a hurry to enable this remote working, I think that's when there's probably, well, there clearly is a bigger chance of people introducing some sort of vulnerability or problem, because they've had to deploy things quickly. They've not had a chance to necessarily think those through carefully and test them and put all the controls around them that they would normally. And just from other firms that I speak to, I know there is a mixture there, but I think generally most people have had a fairly good setup for remote working. I think possibly it's the capacity issue that's hit a few of the firms, so that they've had the mechanism in place, but then when it comes to having all of the office working from home as opposed to 10 or 20%, which is what sort of the normal peaks they would see, then they've struggled with that a bit.
Lucy, how has it impacted on you? I mean, you're a lawyer working from home. How have you found it, and what kind of advice have you been given about the security aspects? Sorry.
Tarquin, we lost you at the beginning of that question.
I just wondered how, sorry, Lucy, can you hear me now? I just wondered how you find it. I was just wondering how you found it, as a lawyer working from home, and what, how you fitted into the organisation from home, and what advice you've been given in order to make yourself more, or keep your security going.
So in terms of kind of as a lawyer working from home, it's something that I did before COVID hit. I did it as frequently. So for me, it hasn't been a huge change. I think in terms of Burges Salmon, what it has meant, and I'm sure lots of other firms are in the same position, is that I think lawyers have always or recently been particularly well set up to work from home. What it has meant is all of our business services teams, so our legal PAs, are now working from home, which wasn't necessarily kind of part of the setup in February 2020, but was very much part of the setup by the end of March. So a lot of work had to happen in a relatively short space of time. But in terms of the advice that we've been given, one of the things that's been really positive is the way communications have changed. So historically, we've had some really good means of communication from kind of senior management and our IT teams. That's really increased. So it's more kind of real-time communication about kind of the new threats, or particularly around new software deployments, upgrades. Burges Salmon is currently kind of undertaking a migration to the cloud. So we're seeing quite a lot of for some of us, it's been a bit of a baptism of fire in terms of kind of the transition to home working, but it's been really pleasing to see how well people have embraced that change and have adopted technology and all the new tools that are being deployed to help us work from home effectively, whilst managing all of the other things that go with working from home during lockdown and COVID-19.
I guess one of the things is about business continuity. So it's about being prepared before the crisis rather than trying to have to catch up on the crisis. Would you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. This is probably the biggest test of anyone's business continuity plans that we've ever had, and that's been, how shall I put it, an exciting challenge, perhaps. I think it's been really interesting for me to see how people have just got things done. They've changed their priorities, and again, there's been a real, I don't want to use a cliche, but a can-do attitude that says, actually, we can get this stuff done. And if you'd asked me, if you'd given me the scenario 3 months before this started and said this is going to happen, what's going to happen, I'd have gone carnage. And I think we haven't seen carnage. We've seen a lot of people working really, really hard, a lot of support from across the different business areas, and I think that's been one of the real positives. We've seen a lot of suppliers and vendors flex on terms to help people out and things like that. So I think that's been quite positive. And I think dealing with the new normal has been positive as well as challenging, is my honest opinion, Tarquin.
I think one little thing to add there as well. One example is printing. So when lawyers are in the office, we tell them you don't need to print as much as you do, but they insist on it. They need to print. When they're at home, they don't have that facility. Then they start making use of the markup tools in PDF and the like. And it's nice in a way because it proves that there is another way of working, and it's working well. It's been good.
I think that's a really good point, and that was definitely me. I did everything printed. Holding a physical document and being able to go through it and mark it up was really what I thought it was a really important part of how I worked. And very quickly, I had absolutely no choice but to look at things on screen. And so it has some positive impacts. I think the other thing for me is that hopefully firms are learning actually how quickly change can be embraced, and actually how ready the workforce is for new collaboration tools, for example. I think historically there have been processes where you have kind of user groups and you have trials, and it's quite a drawn out process, understandably for many reasons, but hopefully this period of time has demonstrated that people can adopt technology a lot quicker than we might think they can, and are a lot more willing to adopt it if you tell them what the benefits are.
That's a really interesting point, and it brings us to a question about some of the technological changes that have been slow to happen, and how this crisis has accelerated change, not just in technology, but other aspects in society. One of the areas I was thinking about was the transition to cloud. John, you mentioned it. Do you see that being accelerated much faster now, adoption of cloud being much more mainstream than it has been in the past?
We haven't accelerated our cloud adoption as a part of this, but then I think for those that have had to find quick solutions to problems they have, then that's obviously been an attractive way for them to do it. So I know some other organizations will have adopted cloud services in more of a hurry in order to meet some of those challenges they have now. Obviously that can introduce its own problems. We've all struggled a bit with some of our financial clients in particular in our journey to the cloud, and I think we're getting there now over time, but we've had some resistance from our clients that have stopped us or at least slowed down our progress to cloud over the previous years. So I think that's moving now. But going back to the vulnerabilities that have been introduced during this period, I think whenever you hear problems about cloud services, it generally tends to center around some sort of multi-factor authentication not being in place, or the no sort of access control or limiting access to known devices, that kind of thing. And again, if people are rolling these things out in a hurry, those are the things that would generally probably be the first to let slip, because it slows things down.
Well, that's a really good point that John's made. It's about the multi-factor authentication, understanding what devices are on your network. I guess that must be a real challenge when you've expanded your virtual network or your remote network.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's interesting. The watchwords of what we do are going to become integration and efficiency, I think. And from that perspective, people have been moving to adopt crisis, and I think the simple things that get missed are often the things that catch people out. Probably 80% of the incident response that I've done in the last 6 months has largely been around people who've implemented something without MFA, without geo-blocking, exactly what John says. And I think those good basic controls will stop all but the most serious of attackers. And again, that to me is probably the biggest learning point I think a lot of our clients have had. And the ones who prepare for it and think about it, even if it takes them a day or two extra, they do a much better job and they have much less problems. And how should I put this? Preparation is much cheaper and much easier than remediation, I think is the best way of putting it. Is my comment.
Well, I think that's a really good point. I just want to expand on that because obviously when you've got a remote network, you've got lots of different endpoints. You've got an increase in endpoints. Is that a particular challenge for law firms as well? John?
Again, it depends on, I guess, the maturity of the firm, the controls they had in place. I mean, so speaking on behalf of Linklaters, we've had a managed detection and response solution in place for many years. We've got all of our endpoints are monitored. As I said earlier, whether we're on the network in the office or at home, that's no different technically for us. But I know there's a number of firms that aren't in that situation, and so yeah, for those, it's definitely going to be more of a challenge.
And John, what would your advice be to those companies that haven't invested or haven't prepared or haven't got the kind of sophisticated approach that Linklaters has had to this?
I think then it comes down to, well, I mean, clearly it'd be good to think about putting one of these type of solutions in place, but that's not the sort of thing you can just deploy at the flick of a switch. And clearly there's a lot of firms that don't want to spend a lot of money at the moment as well, so that's another issue. But I think then coming back to something that Rob mentioned, look at the basics, look at what you can be doing to shore things up as best you can and cover the basics as best you can. So if you can't have the latest and greatest monitoring on all of your endpoints, then at least make sure they're as well protected as they can be with the tools you've got in place, I think. And there's plenty of guidance and best practice, and we should all know what things need to be in place to get those basics covered. There's enough information, I think. It's just having the focus to be able to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, and putting it high enough up the priority list. What would be your thoughts and advice on this?
So I think it's like I say. I mean, I think if everybody was in Linklaters' position and had all the tooling deployed, it would be a happier place to be. But those, as you say, John, are major projects, and they roll out and take a few months to become active, and by that point, your business continuity is taken over and all that other good stuff. I think from my side, I guess the things that I would do, implement those basic controls, as John says, and I would also look what you have. Because one thing I've found with a number of clients is they've had technology that is there and they've either not enabled features that are available. They've perhaps got two things that do the same thing and they can move one of them and put it somewhere else and get a bit more coverage. And there's some very quick wins in nearly every organization I've worked with since this started that say, you've been paying for this for a number of years, no one's ticked the box because it wasn't really that important, tick it. And do that in a risk managed way, but anything you can do to drag down that attack surface and facilitate people working but really restrict the risk. You could use a lot of those things for a little bit of investigative work and for free, but if you get that coverage, you gradually chip away at the problem, and anything you can do to minimize the risk at the moment is great because you haven't got that validation of door controls and people coming into a building and all that other good stuff.
Yeah, so I suppose another issue of this is the convenience, and we all know that convenience is usually the enemy of security. I guess, Lucy, if as a user in a remote network now, how do you find the whole process of logging on, of working through your network? Does it impede your business, or do you accept it and see it actually as an enabler in some ways?
I think the team did quite a lot of work early on to ensure that some of the kind of teething problems having us all moving to working from home were ironed out. And now we have, for me, it's pretty much the same as when I'm in the office. Accessing the network, working remotely is pretty seamless now. And so it's been a really positive experience in terms of the kind of law working from home. I guess one of the things I just wanted to maybe pick up on, and we were just talking about in terms of what you can do. I think I can't understate the importance of, or overstate the importance of communication. I think we've all got a role to play in ensuring that, you know, our firms are secure, and that's whether we're kind of working from home through our networks, or you know, physically carrying documents. And for lawyers and people who work in law firms, I think confidentiality and security is something that is kind of drummed into us from a really early stage. So I think, you know, effective communication to support your investments that you're making in technology and security tools is a really important part of maximising investment and getting the benefits from those opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Do you find that, you know, we've now all had to move, and this is an example of this, we've all had to move to collaborative tools. Do we find the collaborative tools adequate for the tasks that we have? You know, there seems to be a plethora of them, and one of the issues about them is that they don't seem to collaborate particularly effectively. You've got one tool, you know, I've come across people who've said that they use Microsoft Teams, but have been asked to go and use another tool, and their business risk processes don't allow them to log on to other collaborative tools. Is that an issue, John, or is that something that can be overcome quite easily?
It definitely is an issue. I mean, we've had those problems ourselves. So just simple things. I mean, we use WebEx here at Linklaters, and we've had people wanting to use a bunch of other tools as well, often driven by the clients, because clients will be using something else. So we have to be able to join their meetings. But just simple things like presence information. If we have a subset of people using a different conferencing tool, then the presence information isn't going to feed through to our Java system, so then other people aren't going to know that they're in a meeting. And so it does get tricky when there's lots of tools to try and merge together like that. Definitely, yeah. I think it's difficult though, because as law firms, we have to do what the clients want, don't we? And so if they're driving particular different types of technology, then we have to enable our users to use those in order to have those meetings. And it's yeah, there's a downside that goes with it, definitely.
Well, there's the mix of different collaborative tools an issue in security terms?
It certainly can be, and again, I think there's it's interesting that the knowledge transfer between platforms is often the problem. People are used to a set of controls that are managed by their security team. They're really good, and then they connect to a different conferencing app, and their security team hasn't had the oversight of those configurations and setting up those basic rule sets. So they connect in, and then it posts a link on social media to say where they are, or you know, they get bombed on the call and somebody comes in. And I think, to be fair, good basic info security dealing with collaboration tools definitely could be improved. You know, and I think the other thing I've seen, certainly working with my clients, is people very often want to fall back to their communication, as John was saying. So, you know, clients always want to use their one, and then you're always trying to use your one, and somewhere in the middle there's a kind of hodgepodge of things that might happen, and things that might happen are the enemy of security, because obviously it's not defined, and then something strange happens. So again, definitely think it's a challenge. I would say I think it's been overplayed in the media a little bit. You know, we've seen a whole raft of, you know, this is the end of the world type headlines, and really, if people adopt good basic InfoSec on any call or conference, at the end of the day, however you present it, if somebody's sitting on the other end of the laptop with a mobile phone recording what you say, they're recording what you say, and you can't really control that. So my opinion is, if you approach it from a position of good steps for basic InfoSec in terms of not saying what you shouldn't, don't share in open conferences, don't stay on calls after the event to sort of carry on a conversation, those kind of things, which in some ways technology and controls have taken care of us in our own internal lives. We just need to be a little bit more aware of those in the big wide world.
Yeah, good point. I guess the question is, what kind of vulnerabilities do we see now emerging, and which ones are most prevalent, which ones affect law firms the most? I mean, I talked about business email compromise as a growing issue. Is that an issue, Lucy? Do you see that as an issue for law firms as well?
In terms of the types of attacks or threats that we face?
Yes,
so
in terms of the first.
I think, yeah, we definitely see, kind of phishing attacks, kind of emails coming in that purported to be from our managing partner telling us to do X, Y, and Z. We are, I think, as a firm, we're pretty good at picking those up. Our teams are really reactive. Our people seem to be really reactive as well in terms of kind of flagging those internally. I think one of the things that has changed through working from home is, whereas if I was sat in the office and I might have got that email, I would have told the team, it's harder to have that level of communication or that instantaneous kind of communication by just nipping in next door. It's just changed the way that we have to communicate about those sorts of threats. But it's I'm not really seeing kind of an uptick in the threats that are kind of making it through directly to the lawyer population or business services population.
Well, that's encouraging. John, is that the same for you as well? That although these things are out there, that they may not be affecting the legal profession as hard, or is this on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, so yeah, I think as Lucy said, I don't think it's necessarily increased at the moment. It's something that's been high levels for quite a while. Something we see an awful lot of is lookalike domains being spun up. So something that looks like Linklaters.com, but changed in some way. And we've got alerting in place. We've got monitoring, so we get alerted when variations of that name gets registered. Typically, what happens is someone will register that domain. They'll not generate a website or anything to go with it, so they'll just be that domain. They'll have an MX record set, which means they can send and receive email from that address, and then they'll send some sort of fake invoice to someone that hopefully will be a client of ours, and hoping to scam them. And I mean, clearly it's unlikely to work, but there's a slim chance it could, I guess. Where that's really difficult though is it's hard to react to that really quickly, because they jump on the fact that they create these domains, and then within a few hours they're sending emails from that domain. This is never coming anywhere near our system. This is on the internet somewhere. Someone's created that domain. They've sent an email off to a hopeful victim or an intended victim. In most cases, we think they're spotting it and they're informing us about it. But to get that domain taken down is quite difficult, because you need to be able to evidence that it's been registered in bad faith, which is easy if someone has stood up a website that is impersonating you as a firm. If there's no website, then until they've actually sent that first email, you haven't got any evidence to show that they've registered that in bad faith. And so it's just a continual, I mean, it's the whole sort of whack-a-mole thing. As they pop up, we then have to go through the process of trying to get them taken down. Obviously, it's not practical to try and register all possibilities of lookalike domains up front. And that's just something that takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of firms that are suffering with that at the moment. And a lot of my peers I speak to at other firms, we're just all dealing with the same thing, and it's just frustrating, because it's just wasting everyone's time. But yeah, that's something that's happening a lot.
Right. Thank you, Matt. Yeah. PC.
Sorry, Tarquin, I was just going to add to that. I think that's sort of driven a general approach to people being more interested in threat intelligence, more interested in understanding what's actually happening out there. And again, we've seen a massive increase in inquiries for partnering in threat intelligence, sourcing threat intelligence, and supplying our data that we use, purely because identifying those correlating links, it's the same bad guys who register the databases, which gives you a chance of getting it out there before it happens. And I think that's been a really strong area, which is kind of interesting, because it was one of those sort of nice to haves before, and it's almost become I won't say an essential, but it's certainly moved considerably up the priority list in terms of the number of requests that we get in, that be informed before it happens. And I don't know what you guys think, but to me, that's part what John says, you know, the problem gets worse, gets faster, and it's happening a lot, and part because, you know, end users are away from those technical controls largely. So people want to be more informed about what might happen to them.
John, do you want to add anything to that, to what Rob's just said? Or?
No, I think that sums it up well. I think it's say we have tools in place. We get alerted when these domains are being configured. Often, but then what do you do with it? Because you need to let the world know that someone. I mean, we've got obviously things like DMARC and DKIM controls and all of that in place, but that only protects your real domains. That doesn't protect all the other ones that have been stood up. So what you then rely on is the clients having good processes in place to be able to identify the fact that these might be fraudulent when they come through. And yeah, we work with, we will publish these fake domains as they pop up. I mean, I think we'll probably touch on information sharing in a bit, but we share this information with other networks so we can try and get the message out there as best we can. But yeah, getting that across all of our financial clients, for example, is a bit of a challenge.
Well, I think that's a really good segue into that about information sharing, particularly around threat. And I guess this is a relatively good news story in the legal profession. Yeah,
definitely. So for anyone that's familiar with the FSISAC, within financial services, they've had an information sharing and analysis center running for many years, and it's well established, and it's been a really positive way of financial services sharing threat intelligence information and best practice. So we, within the legal sector, I think we've been well connected for a long while as well. There's been peer forums, there's been my equivalents from multiple firms who get together quite often, sharing best practice and talking about what threats we're seeing. We established something called the LSISAR, which is the Legal Services Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. So that's run by the same organization that run the financial services one, the FSISAC. So that's all now run by the Global Resilience Federation. That is an international effort, but we have forums within the UK as well. We've got a really good relationship with the National Cybersecurity Centre. So there's a few of us volunteer in the Industry 100 scheme with CSC, so that there's 5 of us at the moment, but we represent a broader group because we meet quite a lot, and we have a good network within legal, so we can take sort of what we're seeing and we can work with the NCSC, and we can, you know, it becomes a really good way of sharing information and getting some collaboration going. There's obviously financial services representatives are also part of this Industry 100 group within NCSC. Of course, they're our biggest clients generally within the legal sector, and they're certainly the ones that are the hottest on the information security. So again, there's more and more sort of opportunities and avenues to work collaboratively together, and yeah, that's been good. But yeah, I think we do have a really good story there with what we're doing within legal. And there were, I really get quite frustrated attending conferences when we hear the same stories again and again about the legal industry being the soft underbelly of information. And this is some phrase that was coined by the FBI, I think, at a conference years ago, and it keeps getting wheeled out again and again, and it's simply not true anymore. And it's, I think we should be doing more to kind of promote what we're, the successes we've seen, I think, and what we're doing.
Can I just ask on that collaborative piece, is this of use as well?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we, yeah, that's a good platform for anyone within or connected in any way to the NCSC or working with those to share across sectors. We've got our own legal group within CISP as well, if there's more legal specific things we want to share there. So yeah, I'd encourage anyone that's listening to this that isn't involved with CISP at the moment, have a look at it and get involved, because it's definitely worthwhile.
Well, on the collaborative side, I mean, we've also contributed to Industry 100. So there's a two-way flow there, isn't there, between say the guardians and our potential customers or supporters.
Absolutely. I just want to quickly pick up on something that John said there, which is I absolutely agree that the legal sector is not the soft target. I do think that perhaps that comment drove people to make sure they weren't, because they were asked a lot of questions by their clients. But my experience is that there's a high degree of professionalism and thinking in the legal sector about how you secure yourself in terms of cyber, which there are some other sectors that could learn well from that. Sorry, Tarquin, to answer the direct question, collaboration is key for anybody. And again, people, quite often ask us, why do you share threat intelligence with your peers, with other people? Isn't that, something that is part of your monetizable content? And it's exactly what John says. You can use that to defend yourself, but often other people are being attacked that you have no access to, no information with. So the more we can get that information shared and available, and for me, there's three types of intel. There's the generic type, which there's a lot of it, but basically it's just billions of IP bingo that's not very useful. There's no value to it. Then there's the sector-based piece, which there's a lot less of, but there's a lot more value because these attacks do rotate across firms. And then there's the stuff that's directly related to you as a client, and that's super low volume, but super high value. So for me, we see a lot of bragging about, I've got 59 billion IP addresses in my database. Great. I want to know about the thing that's actually coming to get us, and sector-based sharing of threat intelligence is critical for that, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. I guess the other question is about budgets, which John briefly touched on, and how, as we all know, in the COVID-19 environment, people are looking very carefully at what their finances are, and of course, inevitably looking at their priorities. I would say, but I come from a very strong security background, that security is an absolute imperative. But that may not be the view of everybody. Lucy, what advice would you give to many law firms that are listening here about the relevance and importance and how they should prioritise on security in terms of protecting their businesses?
I can't hear you, Tarquin.
Oh, sorry. All right, can you hear me now?
I didn't hear the part of that. Sorry.
I just about budgets, how when people are looking at how to align their budgets, the importance of security in protecting the business and actually protecting it from further costs later on.
Yeah. Okay. So I might put my my lawyer hat on now, particularly as a data protection cybersecurity lawyer, and say that if you're looking at ways to save cost, it's probably not around the security of your systems where you're processing and holding large amounts of data, be that your client confidential information, your employee personal data. I think law firms do hold a lot of information. Getting it wrong and not protecting yourself appropriately or adequately is going to cost you a lot more money down the line, whether that's the basic things that people think about, like regulatory fines, but more importantly, I think reputationally. Law firms are, we're only as good as our kind of reputation, security. That's part of the trust piece. Our clients have to trust us, have to trust that we do all that we can to secure their information. Our employees have to trust that we'll do all that we can to secure their data. So for me, it's definitely not an area where that should drop down the list for budget allocation. I think
Thanks. Thank you very much, John. Linklaters is a big company, and you've obviously invested a lot in security, and judging by your long term in that, which is I would say reasonably unique. What is your view when people are facing these kind of challenges?
Yeah, I think security is always going to come top of that list, isn't it? And that's a nice position for for me to be in when it comes to having to justify budgets. Then it's you can wave the security flag, and you know you're going to get a good answer generally. I think it's important though that, and something that Rob mentioned, making the most of what you've got. So I think it's all very well going and saying, right, I need some more money to spend on this set of controls or this new piece of software or whatever, but I only feel comfortable doing that if I can say, well, actually, I'm doing the best I can with what we've got already, and we've got the basics covered. But there are some gaps, and here's what this new tool or new investment will address. I think what happens too often is it's that whole sort of shiny new tools thing. Someone talks to someone, usually a partner, that says, oh, you need to look at this. This looks like it's really good. And yeah, at some point you'll end up having a demo, and yeah, it will look good. And I'm sure that there's most of those tend to fall into the nice to have bucket, I think, for me. And there's a lot of things that I'd make sure are in place first before going down that route.
Sorry, I probably seem to have dropped out on that. Sorry, apologies. Rob, do you want to add anything on that? Because obviously the point John was making is to maximise what you've already got.
Absolutely, sweat those assets harder, and I think that's going to be the watchword. And it's interesting. It's my position is perhaps slightly different, and I very much hope you prove wrong, because obviously that's what we do. But I think the choice, if you look at how IT budgets are going to be cut, the choice between operating and securing is going to be a challenge for some firms. And I think in my world, it's going to all be about efficiency, integration, and getting more with what you have. And I think I'm starting to see that now. We've seen a lot less requests, as John says, for the nice to have shiny toy, and a lot more about can you configure, can you look at our entire business holistically and address that? Where are the gaps? What have we got that can close them already? And where do we absolutely have to spend money? And I think that's a good thing in terms of getting the most out of what you've got and not being distracted. And it's also good, I think, for guys like John, because again, one of the things I've seen is solution creep over the last 5 years means you just end up dealing with more and more solutions, and you spend longer managing the individual parts of the component and looking at the big picture. So I think there's a value piece in like I say, the integration of the tool sets, driving the efficiencies both of price and also of operating.
Well, I would make one comment, which is that if anything, this crisis has shown how reliant, even more reliant we are on technology than we thought we were before. So being able to ensuring the integrity and security and the robustness of that technology platform is actually critical. If we think about this crisis and put it in a concept of, say, 10 years ago, would companies have been able to operate in the way they've been able to operate today? I don't know if that's I don't know if you've got a view on that, John.
I think no is the answer. Yeah, I mean, clearly the technology, if we didn't have, I mean, just things like soft phones and video conferencing and all of those things that we're just taking for granted now. Yeah, 10 years ago, that would have been a very different story, wouldn't it? Without a doubt.
Listen, can I just ask, because we're getting close to the end, but what do you think are the opportunities for law firms in the new normal, with the workforce at home, with the way things are going in terms of technology?
That's an interesting question. I think in terms of the new norm, I guess my starting point is I don't think we'll be going back to anything that we look like in early March. I think we've embraced technology in a new way, in a different way. So I think this is very much kind of the starting point for how we redefine the way that we work. It's definitely had its challenges. I think that as a lawyer, I rely quite heavily on kind of face-to-face contact for networking, for business development. That's clearly changing. I think the way that we communicate with our clients, this has brought about a real opportunity in looking at how we communicate effectively with clients and internally. There are perhaps, one of the opportunities is around having a more agile workforce that's able to respond to client need and demand in a slightly different way from kind of the way that we have historically been doing in that kind of traditional office-based environment. I think it's collaboration tools have, I think, introduced more flexibility into the way that we work, and I think we'll see more tools coming out that kind of responding to the ways that things are going in terms of how we're changing to embrace what I think will just become kind of our new working environment over the next months and years.
Well, you see it from you've seen it from the beginning now, and I guess in the beginning when your people were all moving towards home, there was a lot of novelty about it and a lot of concern and a lot of gripes about the changes. But I guess that new normality is kind of settled in, and people are used to the environment they're working in now.
So is that one to me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, very much so. It's people are just settling in, and I think a lot of people are finding it quite a refreshing sort of way of working. I mean, not having to travel as much. I mean, that's clearly a good thing, isn't it? I mean, those that just thinking of environmental considerations and people that are stuck on the commute every day. I mean, there's certainly some positives to take from it, and it'd be nice, I think, to come out of this with more of a balance. And it will clearly need to go back a degree to as things were, but it would be nice if we could keep some of these, some of what we've learned from this, I think, and carry that forward.
Lucy, were you going to add something on that?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking when we were kind of based in the office environment, I think that you definitely hear more gripes about things that kind of aren't working or aren't quite working properly. And I think a lot of the time that isn't that they're not working. I think it's that we're not taking the time to get used to them or to embrace them and to incorporate them in the ways that we work every day. And this has forced us to do that and to adopt new ways of working a lot quicker. And I think we're learning that actually when we do that, we can be more effective and more efficient. So I think there's some real positives in the ways that people are adopting their working practices and embracing change, which is good.
Rob, on our side, we've always had an ability to work remotely, but would you agree with those observations from John and Lucy?
Absolutely. I think like I say, I think much like John says, we had the plans there to be able to stand up SOCs and operations wherever they needed to be, and it just so happened that where they needed to be was at home. But I think the flip side of that is it's nice to collaborate and work together, and the tooling's enabled us to do that, and it's kind of good. I'm kind of looking forward to every so often being back in a room with a few people and having a conversation and chatting to them. But I also quite like the fact that I don't spend 4 hours a day in the car, which is a benefit. And I think we've adapted and overcome. Let's not go back to where we were. I'd agree with that 100%.
Well, I think one of the big things is going to be to see how productive we've been. I suspect we're going to prove that we are more productive now working in this kind of flexible and new environment than we were before. We're coming up to the end of our webinar, and I'd just like each of our panelists to come up with a point that they think is a particular relevant, or a takeaway that they think is particularly relevant to these discussions. I think we've shown that there are threats out there. There is a change in the environment out there, but it's not impossible to adapt. In fact, it's very easy to adapt to that and to be efficient and secure at the same time. But Lucy, what would you like to say?
I think my takeaway has to be just the benefits of effective communication. I think the new normal is going to keep changing for the foreseeable future. And when it comes to cybersecurity, telling people what suspicious activity looks like in that new normal and how they can play a role in protecting our organisations is going to be really, really important.
Thank you very much, Lucy. John?
I think an extension to that is the power and value of information sharing within, so yeah, not just informing users, as Lucy's saying, but then between firms and between sectors. I think that's, and yeah, so anyone that's not involved in the likes of CISP, then please get involved. I think that's the message from me.
And Rob, what do you got?
I'm going to say do the basics well and make sure you're getting the most out of everything that you have.
I think that's a really good sound advice. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all my panelists for taking part in this, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.